Step into the extraordinary life of Elizabeth Cochran, better known to the world as Nellie Bly, a woman whose daring deeds and indomitable spirit transformed journalism forever. From going undercover in a women's lunatic asylum to exposing the sale of babies on the black market, being chased out of Mexico by gangs, being the first female reporter on the front lines of World War I, where she was almost arrested as a spy, to setting the record for traveling around the world accompanied only by a pet monkey. Bly's fearless pursuit of truth and justice captivated hearts and minds. Her legacy, a beacon of courage and determination, continues to inspire generations. Join us as we unravel the remarkable journey of a pioneer who broke barriers, shattered norms, and lit the way for future journalists. This is the story of a true American icon, the indefatigable Nellie Bly. Nellie Bly was born Elizabeth Cochran on a warm spring day, May 5, 1864, in the modest town of Cochran's Mills, Pennsylvania. This hamlet was the creation of her industrious father, Judge Michael Cochran, a man whose life embodied the quintessential rags-to-riches tale. Elizabeth was one of 15 children, 10 from Michael's first marriage and 5 from his second to Mary Jane Kennedy. Judge Michael Cochran's rise from a humble mill worker to a mill owner and ultimately to the esteemed position of a judge bestowed his family with a life of comfort and privilege. Yet such comfort was ephemeral. When Elizabeth was 6 years old, her father passed away, scattering his fortune amongst his numerous progeny, leaving Elizabeth's mother and her children with a scant portion of their previous wealth. The family, once bathed in the light of prosperity, was plunged into the shadows of financial hardship. Mary Jane, in her resolute determination, remarried, only to encounter abuse, prompting a swift and decisive divorce and the family's relocation to Pittsburgh. Elizabeth was a precocious and inquisitive child, with a quick mind, and everyone commented on her intelligence. At age 15, she enrolled in the state normal school in Indiana, Pennsylvania. Her mother used what little money she had to pay the tuition, and to add a touch of distinction, Elizabeth appended an E to her surname. She aspired to be a teacher. However, her mother, a single woman caring for 5 children, soon ran out of money, and after merely a year and a half, she was forced to leave school, return home, and help her mother. In the year of 1885, amidst the smokestacks and soot of industrial Pittsburgh, Elizabeth read a column in the Pittsburgh Dispatch by Erasmus Wilson that bore the title, "What Are Women Good For?" According to the Post, the answer was not much, other than to be a helpmeet to a man. Erasmus described working women as a monstrosity. Infuriated, Elizabeth wrote a scathing rebuttal and signed her letter, "Poor little orphan girl." The newspaper's editor, George A. Madden, taken with the writer's moxie, ran an ad asking the little orphan girl to reveal her identity. When Elizabeth came forward, he asked her to write a column that she entitled "The Girl Puzzle," that called for reform in the divorce laws that were weighted against wives. Madden offered her a full-time position at $5 a week. Casting about for a nom de plume, Madden turned for inspiration to Pittsburgh-born Stephen Foster, who had penned "My Old Kentucky Home," the anthem of the Kentucky Derby. The editor landed on another Foster song, "Nellie Bly," thus establishing her byline. Elizabeth began her journalistic career by going undercover in sweatshops, reporting on the wretched conditions of their female workers. Infuriated factory owners threatened to withdraw their advertisements. Consequently, the newspaper only allowed Elizabeth to write articles that fell into the category later known as the Pink Ghetto, focusing on topics such as flower shows and fashion. Miserable, she convinced her bosses to make her a foreign correspondent, and she left for Mexico. For several months, she traveled throughout the country, reporting on corruption and poverty. Her acerbic articles infuriated the government, and fearing arrest, she returned to the States. Her experiences were chronicled in a book, 6 Months in Mexico. Once again obliged to write on entertaining and childcare, Elizabeth quit in protest. Her last act before her departure was to leave a note on Erasmus's desk. "I'm off to New York. Look out for me. Bly." In the labyrinthine streets of New York, Elizabeth Cochran, now known as Nellie Bly, sought out the illustrious Joseph Pulitzer, the magnate behind the New York World. Pulitzer, intrigued by her audacity, agreed to employ her on one condition: she must infiltrate the notorious Women's Lunatic Asylum on Blackwell's Island. The seasoned newspaperman offered no blueprint for entry, nor any strategy for her eventual escape. Thus, in 1887, the determined Bly morphed into an actress of madness. Taking on the alias Nellie Brown, she ensconced herself in a dingy boarding house in the Bowery district. Bly's performance as a deranged Cuban woman was nothing short of masterful. She bemoaned lost luggage, shrieked in terror, aided by the sight of rats scampering across her pillow, and demanded a pistol with alarming conviction. Her act was so compelling that her roommate refused to stay in the same room, declaring she wouldn't do so for all the money of the Vanderbilts. Doctors, thoroughly deceived, pronounced her positively demented. Days later, aboard the ferry to Blackwell's Island, Bly observed with a shudder the coarse female attendants, who nonchalantly spit tobacco juice onto the deck with an unseemly prowess. Once within the asylum's grim walls, she joined the ranks of 1,600 other tormented souls, subjected to barbaric treatments, from filthy garments to rancid food and sadistic caregivers. Complaints were met with brutal beatings, leaving Bly to muse what, accepting torture, would produce insanity quicker than this treatment. Baths were a particular torment. 3 buckets of icy water poured over her head, simulating the sensation of drowning. Dripping wet, she was forced into a garment branded with Lunatic Asylum BIH6, marking her as an inmate of Hall 6. When she dared to request a nightgown, an attendant sneered, "We have no such things here. You are in a public institution. Don't expect anything or any kindness here, for you won't get it." Amongst the psychotic and suicidal, Bly encountered women whose only crime was inconvenience, perfectly sane women who had been disposed of by their husbands who had wanted their money, or to remarry. Another inmate's accented German was misinterpreted as gibberish, leading to a misdiagnosis of madness. Even when Bly dropped her act and spoke coherently, her pleas fell on deaf ears. Starving and exhausted, her relief was palpable when attorneys from the New York World finally secured her release. The ensuing exposé, 10 Days in a Madhouse, splashed across the front pages, compared the asylum to a human rat trap under the shocking headline, "Inside the Madhouse." Bly's harrowing account of patients injected with morphine until they were comatose shocked the public conscience. The outcry was so profound that within a month, the city allocated an additional $1 million to the asylum's budget and initiated a comprehensive reform of the facility, a testament to Bly's courage and the power of the pen. Bly became a journalistic Robin Hood, exposing the rotten core of the Big Apple. Whenever there was an injustice against women, children, or the poor, Nellie Bly was there. To investigate how females fared in New York City jails, she posed as a thief in order to experience incarceration. Her attempt failed when the police recognized her and gave her preferential treatment. On one occasion, she wrote about the black market. "I bought a baby last week to learn how baby slaves are bought and sold in the city of New York. Think of it, an immortal soul bartered for $10. Future assignments involved meeting the female power players of the day, such as Susan B. Anthony, who called Bly the champion of her sex. In articles about Emma Goldman, she portrayed the activist as a person rather than an anarchist. Ages ahead of her time, in a column she posed the marital question, should women propose? A 19th century Renaissance woman, in her free time, Elizabeth took up elephant training and ballet. After reading the Jules Verne novel, Around the World in 80 Days, she approached Pulitzer with the proposal that she could beat the record of protagonist Phileas Fogg. Although impressed by the concept, Pulitzer told her that her gender would make the trip impossible. Cochran's response was, "Very well, start the man, and I'll start the same day for some other newspaper and beat him." Pulitzer conceded. Cochran added that she would make the trip without a chaperone and with only one small satchel. Dressed in her trademark black and white plaid ulster coat and a hat that resembled Sherlock Holmes's deerstalker cap, Elizabeth boarded the steamship Augusta Victoria, bound for England. In dispatches to the New York World, Elizabeth chronicled her experiences, such as the casino in Egypt where she lost money at roulette, the snake charmer in Ceylon, and the instruments of torture in China. Another stop was a visit to Verne and his wife at their home in France. Committed to traveling light, Her only souvenir was a monkey she christened McGinty, purchased for $3 in Singapore. The New York World experienced a spike in sales covering her voyage. Riding the wave of the journalist's surging popularity, companies issued trading cards and games with her image. A hotel, a train, and a racehorse bore her name. In a voyage that entailed donkeys, rickshaws, and horses, after 72 days, 6 hours, and 11 minutes, Elizabeth returned, an international celebrity, setting the record. Thousands of fans greeted her as she stepped off the train. 10 celebratory gunshots boomed from Battery Park. Boats in New York Harbor sounded their horns. A mountain of congratulatory telegrams awaited, including one from Vern. Cochran enjoyed her reputation that, as an admirer put it, established the American woman as pushing, determined, and independent. In a short time, a girl who had come from little and didn't even have a formal education had become America's most well-known woman. A book chronicled her adventures, Nellie Bly's book, Around the World in 72 Days. Because of her journalistic coup, Elizabeth expected a bonus and editorial recognition, but Pulitzer scarcely acknowledged her feat. Angered at the lack of appreciation, Cochran quit and embarked on a lecture tour which earned her $9,000, $250,000 in contemporary currency. In 1890, upon the death of her brother Charles, Elizabeth took her widowed sister-in-law and her 2 children under her wing. At age 30, Elizabeth married Robert Livingston Seaman, a millionaire 40 years her senior. Fans and friends joked that she was only trying wedlock for the story. However, she abandoned reporting to work with her husband in his steel container business, the Ironclad Manufacturing Company, which employed a workforce of 1,500 people. Upon his death, she took over the factory and instituted numerous reforms, including health and recreation benefits, showing more empathy than business acumen. The business floundered, forcing Elizabeth into bankruptcy. Once again, experiencing the financial straits of her childhood, she returned to journalism with The World, where her columns were dedicated to unearthing corruption. In 1913, Cochran covered the women's suffrage procession and published the report with the headline, "Suffragettes are men's superiors." The draw of World War I proved a powerful magnet, and she boarded the RMS Oceanic for a 3-week stint in Vienna. She became the first woman reporting on the Eastern Front. The New York Evening Journal published Nellie Bly on the Firing Line, a column that carried her reports of the carnage. In the thick of the fighting, she fell under suspicion and ended up under arrest as a British spy. In her final years as a reporter for the New York Journal, Elizabeth took up the cause of abandoned, abused, and missing children and became a fairy godmother to an orphaned girl. Elizabeth Cochran, immortalized as Nellie Bly, passed away from pneumonia on January 27, 1922, at just 57 years old. The world reacted to the passing of Elizabeth Cochran, immortalized as Nellie Bly, with an outpouring of admiration and reverence for her indomitable spirit and pioneering contributions to journalism. Newspapers across the nation dedicated columns to her memory, extolling the fearless investigative reporting that had reshaped the journalistic landscape and the audacity that had inspired countless others. Her former colleagues and contemporaries paid homage to a trailblazer who had shattered the glass ceiling for women in journalism. Tributes flowed in from every corner, celebrating her daring exposés that had brought about significant social reforms, and her audacious journey around the world that had captivated the public imagination. She was remembered not merely as a reporter, but as a champion of the oppressed and marginalized, a relentless voice for those who had none. The New York Evening Journal, for which she had penned many of her most famous pieces, dedicated a special edition to her legacy, recounting her myriad exploits and the profound impact of her work. The public, too, mourned her loss, recognizing the departure of a pioneer whose life's work had indelibly altered the fabric of American journalism. In honor of her legacy, organizations and institutions established awards and scholarships in her name, ensuring that future generations would remember and be inspired by the tenacious spirit of Nellie Bly. Her final resting place in the Bronx became a site of pilgrimage, where admirers came to pay their respects to a woman who had indeed girdled the globe with her courage and resolve. The world remembered Elizabeth Cochran not just for the stories she told, but for the barriers she broke, the injustices she exposed, and the light she shone into the darkest corners of society. Her passing marked the end of an era, but her legacy, like a beacon, would guide and inspire future generations of journalists to carry forward the torch of truth and justice. One of the great quotes attributed to Bly could stand as an epitaph: "I said I would, I could, and I did." I hope you enjoyed this week's story on the remarkable Elizabeth Cochran.